Okay, this chapter is about emotions. Chapter 10, we are in the 10th week. There you go, about emotions. Ha 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 ha, all the laughing. Ekman, Sorensen, and Friesen in 1969 proposed that there is a set of basic emotions that are universally recognized around the world. And if we look at these two young ladies, we would have to say that they are happy. Those are smiles, and we would call that happy. That's a universal emotion. That's angry. That's a universal emotion. That's happy. That's a universal emotion. That is sad. That is a universal emotion. It is scared. And that's a universal emotion. That is surprise. Now, they came up with some others that they said were probably, maybe they are universal, maybe they're not. Oh, that's disgusted. I'm sorry, that's another universal emotion, disgusted. And then this one is questionable. It is that facial expression is contempt, and the question is it universal or not? And that's another one. Shame, is it universal or not? There's another. Embarrassed. Is it universal or not? You can tell because her face has changed color. This one is interest. She's interested in the man that she's looking at. There's another one. Pride. The question is it universal or not? Though happiness has many different words, the expression for happiness does not vary globally. When shown posed facial expressions, each culture is best at identifying expressions from their own culture. Meta-analysis of cross-cultural studies on facial expressions, people were about 9% more accurate at identifying people from their own culture, as interesting and weird as that is. Adams and colleagues in 2010 had participants guess what emotions were being displayed by just showing them pictures of eyes. The participants were better at identifying the emotions of people from their own culture, as interesting as that is. They also noted that they showed more activity in their amygdala when they were shown eyes from people from their own culture who were demonstrating fear. The differences in facial expressions of emotions across cultures are distinct enough that people can reliably guess the nationality of targets who are expressing emotions, even though the targets are of fairly similar cultural backgrounds. An American can guess better than chance whether a target is from the United States or Australia. This is an Australian hurdler. I can't remember her name anyway. She's an Australian hurdler. Now I'm going to show you some pictures of women from the Viterbo University soccer team. One of these individuals is Australian, and one of these individuals is from Show Low, Arizona. The other two are from Wisconsin. So here you go. There's two girls here. Oops, I'm sorry, I went the wrong direction. There's two girls here. One is from Show Low, one is from Australia, and the other two are from Wisconsin. So now you've seen all four of them on numerous occasions. The Australian and the lady from Arizona went to Ashford, and they were students of mine. And the other two, of course, are from Wisconsin. Viterbo is up near Milwaukee. Whoops, I'm sorry, I went the wrong direction again. Okay, so which one is which? This young lady, if you guess she's from Wisconsin, you would be correct. This young lady, if you guess she was from Australia, you would be correct. This young lady, if you guess she was from Wisconsin, you would be correct. And this young lady is the lady from Show Low, Arizona. The same researchers did a study earlier comparing Japanese participants with Japanese Americans. Results were similar to those for the Americans and the Australians. When the faces showed emotions, they were easier to read. Neutral faces were much harder to read. Baron Cohen et al. In 2001 and Krauss et al. In 2010 found that people of lower socioeconomic background more accurately identified facial expressions of emotion. The lower the status, the more individuals must attend to facial expressions, if you can imagine. So they're looking at people and they're trying to determine if they're going to be if they're going to be if they're going to give them money, if they're panhandling. They need to look at the police and tell if they're about to arrest them. They that's the only way they can survive. Different cultures will attend to different parts of the face to read expressions. The Japanese find emotions socially disruptive and thus are more likely to try to display a neutral face than Americans are. But it is hard to control the muscles around the eyes, so the Japanese focus on the eyes to determine emotion, as interesting as that is. Research by Yuki et al. In 2007 attempted to determine where Japanese and American focus was trying to read facial expressions. The Japanese read facial expressions from the eyes, Americans read facial expressions from the mouths. European Americans are more likely to try to read the whole face than the Japanese and are more likely to include mouths prominently in their cartoon art. Japanese cartoon art shows dominant eyes and sometimes no mouths at all, as in anime. And we're going to show you some American cartoons. There you go. This is an American cartoon, obviously. The mouth is very prominent. There's the symptoms. The mouth is the most dominant part of the cartoon. And there's My Little Kitty. As you can see, she has no mouth at all. There's two anime characters. Their mouths are lines unless they're surprised. Their eyes are huge. How big are the eyes? Oh, My Little Kitty, of course, her eyes are much larger. Simpsons have big eyes, but they also have prominent mouths. And of course, these guys have little pig eyes. Let's see what we have next. There we go, American Dad. They have big eyes, but they also have very, very prominent mouths. And there's a Japanese cartoon. These individuals are talking, and that's one of the reasons why you can see their mouths, but if you look at everybody else's mouth, you can't see anything at all. While researchers argue that all cultures have a similar capacity to read facial expressions, cultures tend to maintain varying display rules for facial expressions. Display rules are culturally specific rules that govern which facial expressions are appropriate in a given situation and how intensely they should be exhibited. Some cultures encourage people to display their emotions in clear, if not exaggerated, form. In certain Arab populations, it is dishonorable if a man does not respond to an insult with a great demonstration of anger, even though he's not really planning on doing anything about it. If you listen to select detractors, they will tell you that the Quran has 24 different words for sword, and the reality is that is true. But in the Arab population, displaying anger is far more important than actually doing something. One of the problems with the Gulf Wars, the first Gulf War, was that Osama, not Osama bin, what was his name? Saddam Hussein, the leader of Iraq, was merely rattling his sword. He had to do it. He had to exaggerate how angry he was. If you remember before the war started, well, you guys probably don't remember this because you're too young. But before the war started, he said it would be the mother of all wars, and that the American people or the American military would die in a river of blood. Of course, those are all exaggerations. And the reason he did it was because that's what he had to do. As an Arab, as a leader of an Arab country, he had to make those kinds of statements just in order to show that he was a man. He had been insulted or he had been confronted by the United States. And in order for him to save face, he had to exaggerate the damage that he was going to do to the American army. The Koluli of New Guinea tend to show their emotions particularly intensely and dramatically, and this is according to Schieffelin in 1979. Among the Alaskan Native Utku, public expressions of anger are strongly condemned, and this is according to Briggs in 1970. The Balinese have a preference for emotional smoothness, where the emphasis is on avoiding strong displays of emotional feelings for both positive and negative emotions. When Americans are embarrassed, they tend to make a facial expression where their face turns red, they close their eyes, and they look down. That is embarrassment. In India, when someone is embarrassed, they literally bite their tongues, an expression that is not recognized by people in the United States. And here's an individual from India biting his tongue like he's supposed to because he's so embarrassed. Voluntarily produced facial expressions like a wink and a false smile suggest the existence of cultural display rules that lead people to express idiosyncratic facial expressions known as ritualized displays. And of course, if we look at Justin Bieber up here, we can see that this is a real smile and that is a fake smile. This individual, of course, this is a real smile. You can tell because his eyes are crinkled, and that's when you're really happy, then you have crinkly eyes. And this is a fake smile because there's no eye crinkling involved in his smile. Even though his mouth is open about the same amount, it is the eyes that tell you that he's really smiling. The facial feedback hypothesis states that the expressions on our face reflect our true feelings. Strack et al. In 1988 sought to prove the hypothesis by forcing the face to form a frown or smile by holding a pencil in their mouths while watching a comedy. The researchers discovered that those in a smile mode found the humor in the comedy funnier. And I actually did this experiment when I was at Ashford. We took a class of students, and half of them held the pin in their mouths this way, and half of them held the pin that way. And I showed them a very funny, well, it wasn't that funny, I guess. It was a cartoon. I showed them a cartoon for about a half an hour. And at select places, I had them stop. I stopped the film, and they rated how funny it was. And as it turned out, the people with the pin in their mouths like this rated things funnier than the people who had frowns on their faces. Matsumoto et al. In 1988 asked American and Japanese participants about an experience where they expressed select emotions. The Americans reported feeling those emotions longer and more intensely. And we're going to find that this is true of the difference between Americans and Japanese. That's a symbol for the Green Lantern, isn't it? I'm not sure what this is. That's a trophy case. I have no idea what these guys are doing. Mesquita and Karasawa in 2002 had Japanese and American students complete questionnaires indicating the emotions they were experiencing a number of times during the day. The Japanese were 3 times more likely to indicate that they had no emotions than Americans were. McCallums et al. In 2012 and Ryder et al. In 2008 found that East Asians are less attentive to their visceral states when compared with Westerners. We, as it were, we hold our emotions on our sleeves. We keep our emotions on our sleeves as Westerners. East Asians, on the other hand, they try to hide their emotions, or they claim they don't have emotions, as the research from Mesquita and Karasawa stated. So Koto in 2010 found that Ghanaians attend to their emotions less than Americans do. From these studies, researchers have hypothesized that masking emotions in East Asia might be leading East Asians to experience fewer and less intense emotions than Americans. Research in the West has indicated that people with hostile tendencies are at increased risk for cardiovascular disease. The reason hostility leads to cardiovascular disease is that hostile people have more occasions when they need to inhibit their anger. So they keep it inside. And the anger that they keep inside, of course, causes their blood pressure to go up. And that, of course, potentially causes cardiovascular disease. However, in cultures where anger is not expressed, people tend to experience anger less intensely. This hypothesis was tested looking at European and Chinese Canadians. Given potentially anger-induced scenarios, the Chinese Canadians found the scenarios less anger-inducing than did the European Canadians. The most common reaction by the European Canadians from the anger-provoking scenarios was to openly express their anger. For Chinese Canadians, their most common response was to reappraise the situation in a less angry way or to make efforts to distract themselves from the anger-provoking event. The European Canadians felt much anger and tried to express it openly. The Chinese Canadians adopted strategies to minimize their anger response and thus felt less angry. Anderson and Lennon in 2006 measured the blood pressures of their Canadian participants. Both Chinese Canadian and a European Canadian blood pressure slowly returned to baseline levels. Chinese Canadian blood pressure returned to normal faster than a European Canadian's. This is the Miss World Canada. As you can see, she is of Chinese Canadian descent. Chinese Canadians experienced their anger less intensely than the European Canadians and were more comfortable with strategies that served to reduce their experience of anger, whereas the European Canadians suffered from physiological consequences if they did not openly express their anger. So as Europeans, people of European descent, my problem, or the problem that I might potentially have, is that if I don't express my anger, if I keep it bottled up inside, then it's going to cause me more harm. Compared with Americans, negative emotions in East Asians are associated with fewer negative health outcomes and less of a neural response when suppressing their emotions, indicating that it is not as effortful for them to suppress negative emotions. Okay, we're done talking about that. Now we're going to talk about language. The English language has 2,000 different emotion words. English speakers are cued by their language to express their emotions. But just because English is that way, but other languages aren't that way. The Chewang of Malaysia have only 8 words that describe emotion, and only 3 represents Ekman's basic emotions: anger, shame, and fear. Luganda, speakers from Uganda, do not make a distinction between sorrow and anger. The Gidjingali of Aborigines of Australia use one word, Guru Kaj, to express both shame and fear. Samoans use one word, Alofa, to express both love and pity. The Utku of Alaska do not distinguish between feelings of kindness and gratitude. The Ifaluk in Micronesia do not even have a word for emotion, instead lumping all internal states together. Despite the fact that English is a Germanic language, there is no equivalent word in English for the German word Schadenfreude. Schadenfreude is the feelings of pleasure that one gets when witnessing the hard times of someone else. Now, people are really shocked when I talk about Schadenfreude and that fact that the Germans have this. I've read books from Germany, and this is true. I'm reading a book right now about Germany during World War II, and they're talking about Schadenfreude. Now, you can understand how, if a German were in charge of a concentration camp where people were being executed, mass executed, how it would not bother them that this kind of thing was happening, as long as it was happening to somebody else. And this is one of the reasons why, looking back at things that happened during World War One and World War Two, we can see that Germans reacted differently than the Allies, or the people that were fighting them, how they reacted to things. Schadenfreude is very real. The Javanese have a term iklas, which refers to a somewhat pleasant feeling caused by frustration. In Japanese, ame captures the relatively pleasant feelings that one experiences when allowed to emphasize his or her dependence on one another. It often involves the tendencies to behave inappropriately toward a close other as a gesture to demonstrate how secure the relationship is. And this is a picture, I put ame in there, and this is a Japanese picture of ame. Here is this individual. I think that's the female. She's stepping on her husband for something, and this is anyway. Normally, even in Japan, it is the male that is. It's a male-dominated society, and it's usually the male that is dominating the female, and he will embarrass her in public, which is, you know, the Japanese try not to display emotions, but it is not that uncommon for a Japanese male, to insult his wife or embarrass his wife in public. And the Japanese don't think anything about it because it is this feeling of ame, the fact that their relationship is so strong that he can embarrass her, and the relationship would remain. Uchida et al. In 2009 compared the emotional responses from athletes after an Olympic victory. Comparing Japanese and U.S. statements, the researchers determined that the Japanese feel especially good when they're focusing on how their emotional experiences lead them to connect with others. Americans feel especially good when they're dwelling on those emotional experiences that distinguish them from others. In 2013, Oishi and colleagues examined dictionaries for the definition of happiness in 30 countries. They found that luck was included in the definition in all but the United States, Spain, Argentina, Ecuador, India, and Kenya. And the reason I have this picture, this is a Korean, or actually it's an Asian. The Chinese have this symbol too. It's a cat waving, and that's supposed to be good luck. This symbol right here is supposed to be good luck, and we're talking about luck, so I put that symbol in there. People who live in countries where happiness is defined as good luck report feeling less happy than those where luck is not seen as an important part of the definition. Looking at definitions across time in the United States dictionaries, the researchers discovered that the definition of happiness included the concept of good luck until 1961. And this is a headlines from 1961. John F. Kennedy became the president. USSR shot Yuri Gagarin into outer space, and he was the first human in space. Breakfast at Tiffany's was the movie of the year. That's about it. We don't need to talk about Elvis, I don't think. Subjective well-being is the feeling of how satisfied one is with one's life. The nations that score the highest on subjective well-being are Scandinavian and Nordic countries, much of Latin America, various English-speaking countries, and Western Europe. The least subjectively happy people are people of the former Soviet republics and some of the impoverished countries in Africa and South Asia. This is a picture, that's a Ukrainian flag. This is a Ukrainian tank. As you can see, not a whole lot of smiles here. But then again, of course, they're fighting a war and he's showing off his muscle. They did a similar study of the regions in the United States and found that the Mountain West and New England had the highest subjective well-being. The area with the lowest subjective well-being was the Southeast, and that's where most of the racial tension took place during the Civil Rights Movement. Many factors contribute to the overall satisfaction that people have with their lives, and one of them is wealth. There's a shock for you. People who live in countries in which they have access to enough wealth to easily meet the basic needs of life tend to be considerably more satisfied than those who do not. Looking at the history of subjective well-being, once a country has an average gross domestic product of at least 40% of that of the United States, there is no longer any pronounced relation between money and subjective well-being. And that's according to Diener et al. In 1995. Money can buy a lot of happiness if you're struggling to survive. However, it has much less impact if your basic needs have been met. Those countries that promote human rights to the most tend to have the happiest citizens. Those countries in which people live under the constant threat of being thrown in jail for suspicions of plotting against the government are not as happy. The overall equality among people in a country is associated with greater subjective well-being. And this is a picture of a marathon runner. And this is a symbol he made after he won the marathon. I think it was in New York City. As you can see, he's from Ethiopia. What he was trying to say was, my country's in shackles. And so Ethiopia is one of those countries where the government doesn't trust their people. The Scandinavian and Nordic nations have various social policies to minimize differences and opportunities among its citizens. These nations have some of the happiest citizens in the world. It seems people feel good when their rights are not threatened and they have opportunities that are comparable to those of their neighbors. And of course, this is a picture of a man from Oslo, Norway. You see how happy he is. People in individualistic societies were far more likely than those in collectivist societies to base their life satisfaction on how many positive emotions they are experiencing. Positive emotions appear to be seen as the basis of a good life in individualistic societies. Oishi in 2002 looked at how Asian American and European Americans interpreted their past. Oishi had people record the week they were having and then asked them to remember the week. While the two groups had similar weeks, the European Americans remembered their week as more positive than it actually was. The Asian Americans remembered their week fairly accurately. Follow-up research by Rogers and colleagues in 2004 found that European Americans appear to be operating under an implicit theory that they should be happy. Asian Americans seem to operate under the theory that emotional experience should be balanced and consist of both positive and negative experiences. Researchers feel that it is quite possible that many of the observed cultural differences in subjective well-being are based on the different theories that people from different cultures have about how they should be feeling about their lives. In the study by Falk et al. In 2010, Canadian students were asked to choose between a video game that was fun and one that boosted thinking skills. The results indicated that European Canadians were more likely to choose the fun game, whereas Asian Canadians were more likely to choose the useful game. In the same study, students were asked to select university courses from a fictitious set of course descriptions. European Canadians were more likely to choose the courses that sounded like fun and interesting compared with the Asian Canadians who focused more on the perceived utility of the courses. Asian Canadians seem less interested in the idea of doing things for the sake of anticipated positive feelings compared with European Canadians. Life appears to be less about a pursuit of happiness for people with Asian cultural experiences than it does for Westerners. Let me give you a quick example. I had a student when I was at Ashford who was from Bangladesh. And when he first came to the United States, he was planning on studying computer technology, and his minor was math. But he found it grotesquely boring. And after he'd been in the United States for about a semester, after he took my psychology class, he decided that he needed to change his major. But instead of changing his major to what he wanted, he changed it to environmental science because he thought it was more utilitarian. What he really wanted to study was psychology, but he felt that it was too frivolous for him to study, and that people in Bangladesh wouldn't like the fact that he was studying psychology instead of something more utilitarian. Eventually, he started studying psychology, and he was the happiest guy you ever saw. Because that's what he really wanted to do. And now he's working on his PhD in industrial organizational psychology, and he's as happy as a clam. But he's afraid to go back to Bangladesh because he's afraid that they will, when they find out that he's studying psychology, they will think that he's frivolous. European Americans report experiencing many positive emotions and less depression. East Asians who report having many positive emotions are no less at risk for depression than those East Asians who report having very few positive emotions, and that's according to Liu et al. In 2011. Positive feelings do not seem to carry the same protection against depression in East Asia. Grossman and Cross in 2010 investigated Russian and American personalities through vignettes and discovered that Russians were more likely to identify with the stereotype of the Russian brooder than were Americans. Now, the brooding seems to be a national pastime in Russia. One of the reasons they give for it is because Russia is much closer to the Arctic Circle. It's more on a level of Canada than it is the United States. And for that reason, because it's so cold there and their winters are so bitter and it's so dark in that area for an extended length of time, they claim that brooding is that leads to a more sober emotional state than what we have in the United States. We're going to talk a lot about the Russians because the Russians have been our enemies since the end of World War II, and for that reason, of course, we see the world. And once upon a time, and this is long before you were born, until 1989, when the Iron Curtain went down and the Soviet Union collapsed. Once upon a time, the United States and Russia, we had to view everything from looking at that aspect because the United States and Russia were the two dominant countries in the world, and because of that, we had to balance everything between communism and democracy, between their way of seeing the world and our way of seeing the world. And it's one of the reasons that Donald Trump is attacking the Democratic Party as being too socialist. Now, those of you who have never really seen socialism or been confronted by a socialist country, this doesn't really mean a whole lot to you. But of course, we fought the Vietnam War and we fought the Korean War because it was communism versus democracy. It's one of the reasons for that, for both of those wars. And we were confronting Russian communism all over the world. in Africa and South America, literally all over the world. Cuba, that's one of the reasons why we are still so upset with the Cubans. So, looking at the Russian mindset was very important for an extended length of time. And of course, that's one of the reasons why Russia is so important to so many people. It still is. If you remember, if you've been listening to the news since 2016, there was a big deal about the Russians trying to influence the election of 2016. Not only that, but of course, because Donald Trump was in communication with the Russians very early in the process, there were a lot of people that were very upset about the Russians getting involved in our election, and the fact that Donald Trump seemed to be playing up to Putin. But this is because they had been our enemies since they were our enemies for almost 50 years. The Soviets were, and then of course, since the Soviet Union collapsed, Russia itself, what used to be the Soviet Union, is now trying to confront us in many different areas. Okay, so that's the reason the Russians are so important, or understanding the Russian mindset. Brooding over negative emotions, and we're going to talk about the Russians for the rest of the book. Brooding over negative emotions, while common in Russia, does not lead Russians feeling depressed as it does for Americans. Say and colleagues in 2006. So we're going to be talking more about the Russians, and this is really important because the Russians are really not our friends. Not like other countries are our friends. Sy and colleagues in 2006 proposed the notion of ideal effect, the kinds of feelings that people desire. They are the emotions that people are trying to achieve, so they structure their lives in order to increase the likelihood that they will experience these emotions. For most Americans, ideal effect contains positive emotions that are high in arousal, whereas for most East Asians, ideal effect contains positive emotions that are low in arousal. So as Americans, we are looking for stimulation, whereas the East Asians or people from Asia are looking for less stimulation than Americans are. Say et al. In 2006 looked at children's storybooks and found that American storybooks showed faces that were excited and had bigger smiles than the storybooks for children in Taiwan. The researchers discovered that European American preschool children preferred pictures of excited faces more than the Taiwanese preschoolers did. And they also felt more similar to the characters who were engaged in high arousal activities. The Taiwanese children felt more similar to the characters engaged in low arousal activities. Looking at the Gospels of the Bible and the Buddhist texts, Miao and Sepla in 2007 found that high arousal states were encouraged more in the Christian texts, whereas low arousal states were encouraged more in Buddhist texts. And if you think of the two religions, and if you study the two religions, one has to do with meditation, and the other has to do with praying and making a declaration toward the Christian God. Some Christian sects include enthusiastic religious practices such as jumping, shouting, and applause, and rattlesnake handling. Actually, this has been outlawed in several places, but they still do it. More fundamentalist Christian groups, more fundamentalist Protestant groups. I'm trying to think what anyway. There's a lot of singing and dancing and jumping around and talking in tongues and whatnot. You would never see that in a Buddhist religious situation. Their practices emphasize meditation and the calming of one's mind, whereas Christian churches are looking for people to get excited about their religion. European Americans are more likely to engage in active individual activities, such as jogging and rollerblading, whereas Asian Americans are more likely to pursue more passive activities such as sightseeing and picnicking. And you wonder, now, why in the world are these people so skinny if they are so inactive? And the answer is they eat healthier food than Americans do, than European Americans do, which is really weird. They don't want to walk. They want to take a lot of pictures, but they don't want to do very much movement. These are not the activities that they're really looking for. Whereas, when I went on that Fulbright trip to South and Central America, a buddy of mine, an individual that became my friend when we were on the trip, we wanted to climb every mountain. We wanted, and we did. We actually, when we were at Machu Picchu, we climbed up to Huayna Picchu, that big mountain that's behind Machu Picchu. There's steps going up the mountain, and we climbed all the way to the top. Had a great time, and they climbed all the way down. It was fantastic. Looking at a different, we went down a different trail, and it was quite something. We had a grand time. But we wanted to be active. If we had been Asian Americans, if we had been from China or Japan, and we had gone to Machu Picchu, they would never climb to the top of Huayna Picchu. That's just not something that they do. And here we were trying to climb all up to the top of all the temples and whatnot. There's nothing up there. It's not that big a deal. European Americans are more likely to prefer fast tempo and exciting music, whereas Chinese are more likely to prefer calm music. This is Quiet Riot. If you click on this, of course, it will take you there. I can't do that. I can't go there because if I do, this is copyrighted material, and I can't. If I put this in my video, then they will close down my video, so I can't do that. But I suggest to you that you go back to this and click on the purple writing, and that will send you to "Come Feel the Noise" by Quiet Riot. Among Westerners, interpersonally disengaging acts feel especially good. Subjective well-being is associated with positive feelings. People operate under the implicit theory that more positive feelings are better. Positive emotions serve as a bulwark against depression, and high arousal positive emotions are preferred. Among East Asians, interpersonally engaging acts feel especially good. Subjective well-being is associated with appropriate role behaviors. People operate under the implicit theory that it is good to experience both positive and negative feelings. Positive emotions are not associated with less depression, and low arousal positive emotions are more sought after. And of course, this is what we actually said before. And if you click on this X right here, it will take you to the top 100 Japanese songs. It's not that long. It's only a 3 or 4 minute video. But like I said, I can't show it to you, of course, because it's copyrighted. And if I do that, then they will block my video from being on YouTube. And that is the end of the chapter. Okay. So you guys stay safe. I will see you next week. Remember, we're going to talk a lot about East Asians and Canadians and Americans, but we're going to be talking more about the Russians in the waning chapters. So I'll see you next week. This is the 10th week, the beginning of November. You have a paper that's due. Listen, if you guys need any help, you can't find something, you want to write about a select culture, and you can't find a book, then why don't you, if you tell me, I will see what I can do to find you a book that fits what you're looking for. Okay, so just email me, or you can. I have office hours every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. Monday and Thursday are 8 o'clock to 10 o'clock, and my office hours on Tuesday and Wednesday are 4 o'clock to 6 o'clock. So just communicate with me and I'll see what I can do. Okay? Oh, I need to turn this